All right, there we go. So anyways, welcome and thanks for being here on a Friday. So we got a pretty, I don't know, a little bit more of a chill day than we normally have. Um, we have so we're going to talk about makerspaces today. We're going to talk about, or you're going to investigate in the assignment, a fellow named Seymour Papert, and the assignment is kind of called Seymour Papert, their inventor of everything. Very simple assignment. It's watch a video, answer some questions about it, and then that leads us down to talking about quiz number 3. So, but before I get talking and get rolling and all carried away, does anybody have questions for me? No, everybody's good. Okay, I'll just pop the chat up there so I can see it. All right, so let's just do quiz 3 first. And if we scooch up in Google Classroom, you'll see that I have added it here under week 12. Quiz 3 is right here. We are going to do it on April 1st. Let me just double check that date, make sure that I didn't make that's a Friday. Yep. So it will be on Friday, April 1st. We'll try not to have too many April Fool's things going on for the quiz. Of course, the big question is, Brad, what's on the quiz? And of course, it'll be, my answer is everything since quiz number 2. So if we scooch on back to quiz number 2, we'll have Makerspaces, which we're going to cover today under week 8. So we're doing a little bit of a rewind on that, coming back to week 8. Of course, stuff then on Google Classroom, stuff on graphic organizers, a little bit of stuff on FNMI. But like I said to Felicity, if you weren't here when we were talking about that a few minutes ago, not a deep dive on that. So, if you're going to sort of how do I divide my time up for the quiz, this is the one that I would spend the least amount of time on, okay, as far as studying goes. And then, of course, we've got screencasting that we've talked about, and I'm super excited to see what all of you have come up with and those videos. And so that'll be basically the essence of what quiz 3 will be about. So any questions about that? Everybody's good? Awesome. Okay. Well, then let's just so that I can do it now so I don't forget. So the Seymour Papert assignment right here is, if you just click on that bad boy right there, is a Google form. And this is a Google form like you all made at the beginning of term, right? It's first name, last name, pick a section, right? My big fancy drop down menu there that I made. Here is the video. This is a TEDx talk, and it talks about this gentleman right here, Seymour Papert. And I remember when I was in your shoes as an undergrad, way back when, he was a really big deal. Everyone was talking about him and that kind of stuff. So it's a YouTube video. I can't remember how long it is. Just one second. That's 18 minutes. So it's your typical length for a TED talk, 18 minutes. And then there are just a few questions to answer about that. Okay. So as far as assignments go, not a real onerous one to do, and some pretty 18 easy marks to get done. And that's basically what you have. Of course, there is a hyperdoc that goes with it. There is typically, I have done a makerspace project with students in the past, but a couple things have happened since COVID and to now is they have dismantled the makerspace that used to be in the library at the college, and which was a very sad day for me because we had a beautiful makerspace up there. I don't know if any of you were familiar with it, but as far as makerspaces that I've seen or worked in, or the college's one was probably the most beautiful makerspace that I've been in, and then now we don't have it anymore. So, anyways, like I said, kind of sad. Anyways, we're not doing the project. But we are going to learn about makerspaces because, and I'll tell you why. One of the things that happens with beginning teachers, which you of course all are, but once you get into a school and get your first year of job at teaching, there's sort of two things for sure that happen to beginning teachers. One is you automatically basically become the ATA rep for the school. And that's because all us seasoned veterans who've been around for a long time have done it before, maybe done it for years, and we don't want to do it anymore. So what do? You just give it to the new person. Okay, fair, unfair, doesn't matter. Um, but that's a typical role that a beginning teacher gets to take on. And then the second role that really just fits with this class beautifully is usually end up becoming the techspert at the school, because you're the new person who just came out of school and learned all these great things and blah, blah, blah. And you know how to use technology. So now you're going to be our technology rep for the school as well. And then, of course, now with the push for makerspaces for a lot of variety of different reasons, and as we do notes, hopefully it'll come clear to you why having a makerspace in a school is actually a really important thing. And then, of course, the other thing is schools that don't have makerspaces, for you to sort of take over. You might be the person who the principal says, hey, guess what? Let me just pick on somebody. Tessa, I've always dreamt about a makerspace in our school. You're it. I can't wait to see what you do with it. Right. So then it's your job to make a makerspace happen. Right. So that's kind of why we're still going to talk about makerspaces, even though we're not going to do a makerspace project, which again, it would historically has been one of my favorite projects to mark, to see what everybody's come up with as a makerspace project. And then with that said, and when you watch the Dale Doherty video in the Hyperdoc, one of the things that Dale Doherty says in there is we're all makers, right? But we'll get to that in a bit. All right. Questions before? Why did you get rid of it? Felicity, why everything else in education either comes or goes, because it costs lots of money. It costs lots of money to run it, right? And I think partially it might have been a little underutilized. And other than for my class, which again would have been a real peak time for them, for 3 sections of 40 people descending upon the makerspace and wanting to do projects in there. But I think in the in between times, it was kind of a little bit of a lull there. And I don't know, I guess the college figured they were getting a bang for their buck, which is too bad, because I think one of the things that could have been done better is because it was open to the community as well, but I don't think it was advertised very well. So anyways, it's all about politics, right? It's that kind of thing. So, all right. Makerspaces. Let's do some notes. I know everybody's favorite thing to do is notes. So now the 2 big things I think that are 2 big takeaways from this topic are in and around 2 things: constructivism with a V, and constructionism. Okay, so we're going to talk about both of them right now. So let's talk about constructivism. So and I'm going to purposely make that a capital V. Okay, so constructivism is a theory in education that recognizes the learner's understanding, and you can put an apostrophe wherever you want on that one. I'm going to put it at the end to include all learners. The learner's understanding and knowledge based, understanding and knowledge based on their own experiences, prior to entering school. Okay. And we could extrapolate that sort of this definition, or whatever you want to call it, a little bit, even just to prior to any new experience. right? Because remember, we've talked about in lesson planning and along the way, we've talked about that, learners have background knowledge, right? They bring knowledge to whatever it is that you're trying to teach them. And then you can pick, pretty much any topic, any grade, any subject, and kids bring some type of understanding and prior knowledge there. And again, based on what they've learned thus far in their lives, whether they're a 5-year-old going to kindergarten or whether they're a 15-year-old entering high school, there's a variety of experiences that people bring to the table, kind of idea. Okay, so when we talk about constructivism, that's what kind of where we're going. I'm just going to give you a little bit more on this. Let me just make a new page here. So I'm just going to write down here the philosophy and philosophy, and I want you to underline that word. Okay, and that we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the philosophical part of that in a sec. The philosophy of constructivism of construct, and again, I'm going to make it purposely a capital V. And just I doing that because once we start about putting constructivism or constructive vism or vists in a sentence with constructionism and constructionists, it can get confusing. So I purposely make that capital V. So the philosophy of constructivism says that learners will construct, right? I mean, that's the whole kind of gist of this. Will construct their own unique, right? There's a word we don't spell very often. Unique meanings for concepts, comma, so it is, oopsie, is no, and I'm going to put the word not in capital letters and underline it. It is not reasonable to evaluate students I'm just paraphrasing here for a sec, based on how well they meet a normative goal. Okay, I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. Here's what I mean by that, is that the whole idea behind constructivism is that, again, what we're doing is we are taking or presenting a topic to students that then they can sort of work with and massage within their own understanding of that topic. And then, so what we're talking about here, why it's not reasonable for this normative goal thing, is this. So if you're a purist, constructivist person, you would not be, you would be arguing against things like provincial exams, arguing against things like diploma exams, arguing against things like Canadian achievement tests that we all do in those kind of off grades where we're not doing provincial testing, in grades 2, 4, and usually 8, right? And so when we do those, but when we do those types of testing, what we're doing is this. Oh, that is just the worst. Sorry, a second. Let me try that again. There we go. Oops, there we go. All right. Without any other hints or anything, where am I heading with this? Does anybody know? Well, yes, Kathleen, what kind of curve? Or what's kind of the formal name for it? Or a name that we know it by? We know it by the name of, dun, 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 yes, there we go, a bell curve. Okay, so we know this is a bell curve, and we know that this is a system of grading people, right? And in our world, kids, right? And we know that right here at sort of the apex or the top of that hill or that curve is where is what we call kind of like the norm or the median or the average, right? And if you look at, let's say, for example, provincial achievement tests, and we could pick any achievement test at whatever grade. Let's pick grade 6, and let's pick math. And so what happens, where the norm part of this comes in, is that so on any provincial exam year, and you may or may not be aware of this, is that that grade 6 math test is written on a certain day, usually in May, at a certain time. And then the other part of that is that all kids in the province of Alberta would be writing the quiz on that same day and at that same time. Right now, there may be a few exceptions based on individual schools, but that's the general rule. And then, of course, all of these kids write this exam across the province, and then, of course, those exams are marked, and they go into a big general pool. And what we end up with is a bell curve. And what we're looking at is we're looking at this sort of intersection here at the top, and this is then where we would say that kids are meeting outcomes, uh, and you don't have to write this down really if you don't want to, but or this is kind of like again like the average, right? And so if you're there, that's great. Okay, and then of course anywhere on this side of the curve means that you're not at grade level. And then anywhere on this side of the curve means that you are, exceeding at least the average, right? Now, here's here's kind of the rub with this, is that if you look at that, again, these types of tests take a snapshot of what's going on in a child's day. That day, on that day in May, at that time in May, we are just going click, here's what that kid did on that day. And then we're making all kinds of judgments and assumptions about their abilities or not, their lack of abilities based on that type of thing. Where in a constructivist approach, what we're doing is we're looking at it holistically over a long period of time, and then we're looking at what kids can or cannot do. Okay, and so then, and of course, this in our level at the post-secondary level, a bell curve can work for you and against you. So again, if we're looking at that, so if we write quiz number 3 on April Fool's Day, and let's say I was going to curve the marks, and let's say the average mark, after we did the quiz, all of you did fantastic, and the average was 92%. What letter grade would you get based on that 92%? Nobody wants to throw an answer up there? What letter grade do you think you should get if you got a 92%? Let's even make it higher. I'm going to make it 95%. That'll make it easier for you to tell me. Right. An A or an A plus, potentially there easily. Right. But that's not how it works on a curve. The question I asked was, what grade would you get if everybody landed right here at 95? The answer would be, you'd be getting a B. Okay. So at the post-secondary level, because that is the expectation, is that the average grade should be in the B range. Okay. And interestingly enough, in at least in my class that I teach, almost invariably it's in the B minus to B plus range always. Right now, for the most of students. Now, of course, there's students that get less than that and some that get better than that, just like on any curve, right? So, I can just ask you can just answer this question in your head. If you got a 95 in this class and then I gave you a B, would you think that was fair? Right? And I would imagine that most of you are thinking, no, that would not be fair. I got a 95. Well, I can tell you that not that many years ago, when the U of A, the instructors at the U of A have the option now either to curve marks or to give what they call an absolute grade. Okay, but prior to that, all marks had to be curved, and so that didn't matter. So I taught a middle years class a few years ago, and literally the reason that I used the number 92 originally is that was my class average. All of those students in that range got a B. They were ticked off. But that's how the curve works. Now, it could also work for you because conversely, let me just make a new page here. If we have that curve, and let's say, again, let's go to quiz 3 for a second. Let's say you all didn't do terrifically. Let's say you all bombed the quiz and the class average was 47%. Again, naturally, we would look at that and we would say, well, then whoever got 47% failed, right? But no, again, that would be a B. So when grades are low, a bell curve can work in your favor, but when grades are high, it certainly definitely works against you. So that's sort of the pros and cons of a bell curve. And this is what we call normative testing. So right, what is the norm? There it is. That's the norm. Again, whether that be in quiz number 3 for our class, or that be on that math test for grade 6 math, we call this normative assessment or evaluation, if you want, or testing, right? The other one that we look at and we talk lots about, and this is not an assessment class, so we're not going to go too deep in, is criterion referenced testing. And that one is more like the absolute grading. And we have experience with both of these in our lives. You have experience with this one in the K-12 world, and you have more experience with this one in the real world, right? Examples of criterion testing is that the grade that you get. So if I got an 85, that's the grade I get. And I'll give you some examples. On if you have taken your learner's test, you've had to answer a series of questions to get that learner's class 7 license. What's the passing grade on a learner's test these days? Is it 80, 85%? Somebody tell me. I know it's usually based on how many you can get wrong, right? But I think it's around that 80, 85% range. So really what this is, it's a pass fail, right? If you get 85%, you pass. If you get less than that, you fail it. Can you think of any other examples in the real world where there is that hard line where this is the passing mark, anything below that is a fail? I know I can think of different ones. Okay, no one's giving me answers in the chat, so let me throw a couple out. Have any of you ever taken first aid or CPR? Right, on those the written portion of that type of first aid is I think around an 80, 75, 80, 85 mark as well. And if you don't pass that, you fail that part of the course. Now, of course, those courses also have a practical component, but there's an example. Any of you have ever taken your firearms license, hunter training? Any of you, yeah, certain college tests for sure, Jenica. Any of you out there who are servers and you've taken your pro serve exam, there's that cutoff mark, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about criterion reference tests and absolute grading, right? So at RDC, we use absolute grades. So in this class, if you got an 85, and I've got our little grade chart right here, if you got an 85, that's equal to a B plus. Every day, all day, no exceptions, right? And so that's our grade, chart or schema that we use there. So anyways, a little bit of a long-winded thing on that topic, but I think it's important for us to make that or distinction, that understanding that constructivists are hardliners against normative types of testing your goals, right? They are all about kids developing themselves along the way by learning and scaffolding that learning and that kind of stuff. And that's really the nature of a maker project, right? And so we'll come back to this when we get a little farther into our notes to see what there's something that we call kind of looping, right? So anyways, so let's do one more constructivist thing. So let's do this. Constructivist teaching. Constructivist teaching is based on the belief, that learning occurs as learners are actively involved in a process um, of meaning and knowledge construction of meaning and knowledge construction rather than passively receiving information, kind of like you are right now, passively receiving. Did I before? Is it like this? There's another rule. I think that's receiving information. Okay. So with that said, we still have to keep in mind that there is a time for hunters' steps, right? We don't just let kids do whatever they want to do without any kind of, some instruction from the teacher. So even if you're a purist and you're, constructivist all the way, there's still times where kids are going to sit there and you're going to direct teach them, right? There is that type of thing. The only two places that I know of in the world sort of idea, in the K-12 world at least, that are like kind of purist constructivist types of people are people who teach at Montessori schools, or Waldorf schools. Okay, they have very distinct and different philosophies about how kids should learn than the traditional K-12 system do. And again, we're not taking a deep dive into either one of those things, but it's kind of neat to know that there is out in the world schools that believe in this type of philosophy and actually do it. Now, again, not that you haven't been exposed to this in your regular K-12 traditional classrooms, because there's lots of times where you've worked on projects and things in various types of classes. And of course, those all have elements of constructivism in them, in that. Okay. Now, here's where we're going to, and to work in either one of these types of schools, you actually also have to have special training. You can't, with your degree, you just basically, you don't walk from finishing your fourth year into a Montessori or a Waldorf school. There's other credentials that you would need to have and training that you would need to have to be able to do that. Okay. All right. Let's talk about constructionism right now then. So remember, so here's a bit, let me just go back in our notes here. The big thing about constructivism is that we're talking about a philosophy. Okay, right? So that's a philosophy that we're talking about. Okay, so then with constructionism, then let's do this. Construction, and again, I'm going to purposely make a capital there, nism. Is more of an educational method, is more of an educational method. Okay. Which is based on constructivist learning theory, or we could put philosophy in there as well, learning theory. So constructivism is more of the pie in the sky ideas about how kids should learn. Constructionism is like boots on the ground in the classroom doing it kind of idea. Okay, so that's the difference. And so they're both kind of like kissing cousins. They're related to each other very, very closely. So we'll just say here that this too, constructionism let's say, I'm going to say the word states that building knowledge occurs best through building things that are and tangible. I'm going to write that here, tangible. I want you to underline that word, tangible. Okay, and shareable, and I want you to underline that word because those words are going to come into play here in just a minute or two. That they're tangible and shareable. So things that you can literally put your hand on, and you can share with the other words. And if we look at that word shareable, where else did we in what we've learned thus far, where does sharing or shareable come into play? Again, thinking of all the jigsaw pieces that we've learned about so far this year, which jigsaw puzzle piece has the word shareable or sharing in it? Don't leave me dry here on the chat. I'll give you a hint. Bloom's taxonomy, right? That is, there you go. Thank you, Kathleen. Right? Is one of, remember when we did the pyramid, right? We did, the 6 main things. And I said, now what we're going to do at the very top is we're going to add sharing. Okay. And there's, again, lots of a variety of different reasons that we're going to do that is because now, again, in this day and age, the construction of knowledge, but also the sharing of knowledge is almost kind of in a way equally important. Okay. And yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Okay. All right. So right. And I just want to just make one distinction because this is really important when we're talking about makerspaces. Or can I just do it back? No, I didn't leave myself very much room there, did I? No. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna write this whole sentence down. I was trying to think of how I could just dissect it into a smaller chunk, but we can't. I don't think I can do it right now. Not on the fly, anyways. Constructionism is the idea that the best way to construct knowledge or understanding, to construct knowledge or understanding is through the construction of something. Oh, can I squeeze it in there? Something. Oh, there we go. Something shareable. There's that word again, shareable. Now here's the really important part. Outside of a student's head. You're like, what, Brad? What? Here's what I mean by that. Is that if we think about the term, yeah, I guess the term intellectual property, right? It is something doesn't, or copyright or trademark or those types of words. Something isn't one of those words if it still resides inside your head, because then it's not, it hasn't been shared yet. It hasn't been presented to the world, right? So until you really kind of literally formally come up with, a product that is shareable with people, but that is still, because we all have ideas like I could do something really cool here or whatever, right? But until you actually articulate that to the world, um, and it's shareable, it's not really intellectual property or a trademark or copyrighted or any of that kind of stuff. So like the ownership of that doesn't belong to you until it's outside in kind of common knowledge to the world, right? So that's what that means. And again, one of the big tenets on the maker movement or maker spaces is that whatever you're doing, like one of the elements of a good makerspace project is that it's shareable, right? Is that I can, let's say 3D print this ball, but other people could also do that. And I could share that with them and how I did it. And here's the 3D printing file that you can plug into a 3D printer and make your own, right? Or you can make it better, or you can, do something different with it. So when we talk about that, and that's kind of a segue into just a little bit about, what kind of things happen in a makerspace. Well, one of the big things that probably most makers, actually every makerspace that I've ever been in, one of the main things that they have is a 3D printer, right? Are most of you familiar with 3D printing, or at least know what I'm talking about? Give me a yes or a no in the chat, please. All right, so most people are familiar with the term 3D printing, right? And really, literally, 3D printing is no different than you typing up a Google Doc and going file print and sending it to a piece of paper. Okay, the only difference is that with a 3D printer, you're getting something that is three-dimensional versus, like a piece of paper, right? And of course, 3D printing, if you're not familiar with it, of course, there's lots of things that the major medium in 3D printing is typically like something plastic, right? I was just reading a really interesting article yesterday in the news, and this is starting to become way more prevalent in the world, is people 3D printing actually guns, like firearms that can shoot bullets. And so they just had a big bust, the RCMP and the border patrol people, the Canadian border people had a big bust of this person importing 3D printed guns and all this kind of stuff. So it's amazing. I always find that, whatever newest, greatest innovation that we come up with, people figure out a way to ruin it, kind of, in a way, right? To make, I don't know, flip it from something good to something bad. But interestingly enough, here we go. Is there anything else other than plastic kind of things that can be printed, is 3D printed? Are you aware of anything else? Okay, so actually, interestingly enough, Felicity, in my list, in my notes right here, 3D printed houses is the first one on my list. So if you're not familiar with this, they're doing this. They are 3D printing houses, not out of plastic. Does anybody, or Felicity, do you know what medium they're using to print 3D houses? What are they printing it out of? What? It's not wood. So what? Do you know what it is? Yeah, no worries. It's concrete, right? So what they're doing, and if you're not familiar with 3D printing, what 3D printing does, and just look on the black screen for a sec, is it's layered. So they print that layer, and then the next layer goes on that, and then that. And so then if you're thinking about, 3D printing a house, what they do is they print this layer of concrete first, and then they put another one on top of that, and before you know it, you have a house. And very interesting. And they're doing it down in the States lots. And where they're thinking that this is really going to be prevalent is in third world countries, where people don't have like a permanent house. So you can think of places, let's say in on the continent of Africa. You can think of places where they're either developing or third world types of third third world types of countries where people live like in shanty towns, right? In cardboard and tin and just stuff that's sort of slapped together. The 3D printing a house is, from the last thing that I read about it and saw about it, roughly, if you think about just a normal house that you drive down the road and look at a house, is roughly about half the cost of printing. And I mean, that's a big house, right? Like my house, what, 2,200 square feet or whatever. Is a roughly half the cost. So very interesting. I saw that she said yes. So one of the other things, Oksana, and it's not just the heart, is there are 3D printing organs, my friends. They are 3D printing stuff that's going to keep you alive. Oksana's seen also a 3D heart, and that heart is functional. Now it's very tiny. They haven't printed, a full size, human heart or whatever. But it's a functional pumping human heart. The other one I've seen printed are lungs, and functioning lungs that are actually, sucking in and pumping out in and out air. And then the other one that they've done, they've done this one for quite a few years now, 3D printing you a new ear. For whatever reason, if you lose an ear, it is apparently quite easily to do, is print you a brand new one. And of course, that's all based on things like stem cells and all that kind of science, right? But the most exciting one that I am so excited about, yes, all kinds of stuff there, Kathleen, perfect, is 3D printed chocolate things. Yummy. And so that's another medium that they use, is 3D printed chocolate things. So that's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool. And then of course, they're looking at all kinds of different types of food now, right? They're talking about, lab generated meat, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, as we talk about that, it also leads me to have to mention, how now the big thing in restaurants is robotics, right? Is that nowadays, and already they're doing this in some places. You go into a pizza joint, you on a computer screen, you say, I want a medium pepperoni pizza, and you put your order in. There's a robotic arm that does the whole thing for you, and there's actually not a person there. It's kind of interesting. How things are changing, almost to the point where it's like, almost, you just say to a computer, print me a pepperoni pizza, and the magic happens, all of a sudden you've got a pepperoni pizza, kind of almost like, Star Trek-y kind of stuff, right? So 3D printing, what they in the medical world, they call it, one of the terms they use is bioprinting, right? But you're right, there's all kinds of things that they can do now, with genetics and DNA and all the stuff that we know about that, to help keep people alive. One of the interesting things that I've heard is that if we all can live 25 more years, expect to live another 100, because they're going to be able to print those organs and replace all kinds of, like, grow you new things, probably minus your brain, but everything else, they're figuring out how to either regenerate that, or how to just print you a brand new one, right? And even with robotics and prosthetics now, where you lose a limb, they can give you a prosthetic arm and hand that your brain and your nervous system controls. So very, very interesting field. And of course, where do most of these new technologies land? In medicine, right? And the other one that's interesting in and around 3D printing and that world of a cutting edge technology is in the art world, right? One of the very first 3D, not 3D, sorry, VR things that I ever saw was an artist thing. And of course, back then, that was back in the early 2000s, so quite a long time ago. It was medicine and art that were using virtual reality and those cutting edge types of technology. So very interesting stuff. Okay. Okay, we're good in the chat. That's good. Okay. Let me just scooch down to my notes here. All right. So let's make a title that's called "What Makes a Good Maker Project." So let's see. What makes a good maker project? Good maker project? I guess that's a question, eh? And there we go. Oops. Ooh, I'll go carried away here. We're still on orange. Okay, there we go. All right. So let's add in. So let's just clarify a couple things. I think that are sort of undeniable. Is that humans, right, have a basic impulse, right? It's kind of hardwired into us, a basic impulse to create. And I think that we can't argue against that. And I think that if you think about, like, historically, you go back to, I don't know, I can't mention all the names of Homo erectus and Homo whatever, but if we go back to sort of, let's say, caveman days kind of person, I guess nowadays we say cave person days, right? I mean, the impulse to create was utter survival, right? We need to create shelter. We need to create a clothing and those kinds of things, and those were all based on just survival, right? Even really think about the wheel, right? Or those, some of those basic types of things. Those are all basic impulses to survive and to make their lives a little bit easier back in those days where we don't have all the luxuries that we have today. Okay, all right. So the other thing that we're going to talk about, or the other thing that we need to think about here, and I'm going to use teachers in a broad sweeping point, is that teachers instinctively, and we can maybe even say good teachers, but we'll just say teachers in general instinctively know that projects, and of course, oopsie, when we talk about projects, right, in our teaching world, and I'm just going to put the initials down, what we talk about, or what we call it, is project-based learning, or PBL. Okay, so teachers instinctively know that projects are worthwhile. Okay, so again, if that's the case, why don't we see more of it, or why is that not how the teaching system is built? Well, the reality is that to do project-based learning, it takes a lot of time, right, and effort on the teacher's part to put that together. Because essentially what you're doing, and if we're going to tie words and jigsaw puzzles together, what we're looking at is sort of differentiated instruction. We're looking at inclusion, and we are looking at personalized learning. Because in the constructivist world, or the project-based world, what I'm doing is I'm saying, Hannah, well, there you are, picture in your hockey uniform there on the screen. What is the thing that you're really most excited about these days? And it might be sports, it might be a hobby, it might be video games, for everybody it's different, right? Then if I were truly a project-based and constructivist teacher, what I would do is I would say, okay, Hannah, you're interested in hockey. So then from a social studies, math, science, and pick all your subjects point of view, what I'm going to do is I'm going to inject, or I'm going to try to show you within hockey how math is important, and the science of it, and the cultural social studies part of it, and the all of those things. So then what you're really looking at is making 30 plus in an average K to 12 type of school setting, 30 plus individual plans for kids to learn from based on the curriculum, right? Of course, because you always have to meet the curricular outcomes. So that's why we don't see it as sort of a mainstream thing in schools, is because there's lots of pieces that go to that to make it successful. And in the world that we live in now, the teacher world that we live in now, to do project after project after project, and that's how we tackle the curriculum. We just don't have enough time to do that, right? Because not only we're doing project-based learning, but there should be this iterative loop of creating, making, failing, revising, creating again, that kind of idea. And we'll talk again. There's a specific terms that we'll use for that in a second. Okay, so then this next sentence is going to have some Bloomsy types of words in it. Okay, so the point, then if we're talking about what's the point, the point then is what? The point of the space, and when I say the space, I'm talking about makerspace, right? Of course, is to make. Okay, duh, right? Create. There we go, with our Bloom's words, and invent new things, right? And you can think of anything in your life that makes your life happier, easier, whatever it is, whether it be your iPhone, right? This is an invention. Somebody made this, somebody created it, and now and they've shared it with the world. So it makes it much, much easier. Just speaking about iPhones, how about this aside? I read last night, sometime yesterday. Does anybody know what Apple's planning to do with iPhones? Did anybody read this too? Well, here's why, or here's what's happening. How does that work? Well, anyways, I'll say it this way. What they're planning on doing is basically when you're going to get your next iPhone, you're going to do it almost like you're renting it. So that instead of buying it outright, they're going to basically lease it to you or rent it to you, and you're going to use it so that every time that the next iPhone comes out, you can renew it and always have the newest device. So it'll be like a paid service instead of what we're doing now. So it'll be interesting to see if it works. I think it will. I think Apple's always cutting edge, and they always got the greatest and newest ideas out there. But again, it's this whole idea of creating and inventing and sharing these things. So, and then there's another point that I want to make is, the question that we ask students of or kids, what do you do? What do you want to do when you get big, or when you're an adult? What do you want to do, right? And I was watching this TED Talk, and I thought they have a better way to ask that question. And instead of saying, what do you want to be when you grow up, is that this question is, when you grow up, how would, I think this is brilliant, how would you make the world a better place? I think that's a brilliant question to ask young people, right? For people like me, I can still say, like, how can I make the world a better place? But for younger kids and even people your age in front of, in our class is, how are you going to make the world a better place? And I think that's a really, viable question. And of course, that goes in and around the makerspace movement, or anything that gets invented is, how will your invention make the world a better place? Or whatever you're making, how will that make the world, or can it make the world a better place? And that's a good starting point when we're talking about project-based learning and constructivism and makerspaces is why are you doing the project you want to do, and what's the overall benefit to sort of the human race kind of idea. And sometimes it is more or less important. But all right. All right. So this is one of the things that the big term that I want to take here. So let's do this. I'm just going to say great projects and great makerspace projects, or the types of projects. Great projects have a self-regulating, can I squeeze that in there? Regulating, I like that. Feedback loop. Okay. It's like, what's that? What do you mean by that, Brad? I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Okay, let's underline that term, or those terms. A self-regulating feedback loop. Basically, what that means is, the first time I tried to 3D print this ball, it failed. And it was just like basically a big blob, and it didn't work. So then what I got to do is I got to figure out what went wrong and then try it again. And if it fails again, then I got to try and think about what went wrong again, and I got to try it again. If you want to think of the self-regulating feedback loop, here's another way that we can think about it, or something that we can compare it to that might help make it more sense. All of you should be familiar with scientific method, right? And again, in a nutshell, the scientific method goes like this. I have an idea for an experiment. I have this hypothesis, and then I go through all the steps where then I'm going to conduct my experiment, and did my experiment fail and go, or did it go the way that I thought it should go? And of course, if it fails, then you go back and you revisit all of those steps before the experiment to try to make sure that you can actually do what you want to do. So a self-regulating feedback loop is kind of like what we would refer to in the science world as a scientific method, right? And it's just that continual loop of idea, trying it out, failing, idea, what went wrong. And so that of course that leads to a lot of higher order thinking skills, problem solving skills, and all those kinds of things, all those good things that we want kids to be able to do. So and of course that leads to those higher level of Bloom's thoughts of analyzing, applying, evaluating, those types of ones that we want to get kids to. So that kind of that this self-regulating feedback loop is a thing that is sort of a natural thing that happens when we try to do inventions and things like that. And you got to think about people. Let's see, even like take a guy like Elon Musk, right? I mean, how many failures have they had with his rockets and his self-driving cars, that don't work, and then they go, okay, well that car crashed. So what went wrong? Okay, let's fix that sensor and that thing, and let's put it back out on the road and see how well it drives. And then it crashes again. And then they're like, why did it crash? And so again, there's that loop that they keep going until they're successful. So let's talk about success for a second, because this is not only is this important in there we go, in like the makerspace kind of world. This is actually something that is universal throughout everything that we do in the classroom. So and it's this. Let's call it incremental success motivates a student to try something more ambitious. And there's a word we don't spell very often, hey? Ambitious. I'm just going to do this the next time, right? So, I do something simple and go, oh, I'm just going to try and 3D print this ball, which by the way is not 3D printed, but and it's like, wow, that worked. Woohoo. Okay, now I'm going to try something bigger and better, right? And those small successes lead to children willing to take chances, willing to put themselves out there a little farther outside their comfort zone, and then obviously lead to things like self-driving cars and rocket ships and or whatever the case may be, right? And I mean, we can put it down even to our real lives, right? Have you ever tried, you wherever on the web or in some book, you found a recipe and you follow a recipe and you do it, and it turns out it's like, yeah, this is a pretty good meal. But you know what? And I do this all the time. It's like, how can I make this better? Right? How could I make this supper better? What would I add to it? Would I add another spice? Could I add some other side dish that would go with it to make this better? And we do that often, right? So something even as simple as this, what are you going to have for supper? Is this, these incremental small successes that we have that motivate you then to try something bigger the next time kind of idea. Now, the flip side of that, and this is something that we need to be very cautious with, is also repeated failures then obviously demotivate our students to go out there on the limb or on the cutting edge kind of idea. And that's those repeated or repeatedly being unsuccessful for our students then leads to things like behavior problems in school, dropout, and all kinds of different bad things. So we need to think of that the other way again is that in our classroom, it doesn't matter whether you're just sitting in social studies, language arts, doesn't matter. Kids need to have, human beings need to have incremental successes to keep them motivated to keep going. And if they don't, then they either become sort of stagnant and don't move forward, or they actually sort of digress and just lose hope and just say, screw it, basically, pardon my language, but you know what I mean. All right. All right. Okay, one more thing to say about this. Bugs, and I'm not talking necessarily about the, you know, creepy crawly flying ones that we don't like. Bugs are mistakes. Lead students to rethink problems and test new strategies. This leads to powerful learning. So then one of the things that we have to think about when we're doing project-based learning or we're doing makerspace type of stuff is, and we're going to get to this in a second here with the last little bit. What time is it here? Oh yeah, we got time yet. Is we don't, and we should not let kids sort of bite off more than they can chew. Right. And what I mean by that, sort of metaphorically or allegorically or whatever other, you know, thing that you want to think about is this, is that because if they bite off more than they chew, they can chew, they're probably going to fail. And even one failure can just have kids throw up their arms and just say, screw it, I'm not doing this anymore. It's stupid, right? Whatever, blah, 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 right? So when we're thinking about project-based learning or maker spaces or really anything in our classroom, and you know, even when it's like, okay, kids, I want you to write a report, and here are the 7 topics that you can write your reports on, or you can come up with your own topic, but it has to be teacher approved. So when we go that teacher approved, like those 7 ones that we're giving kids, we know sort of historically, those are ones that we know that our grade 5s can write about, or our grade 9s can write about, and write, you know, fairly successful, you know, papers or reports or whatever they're writing it, right? And then the other category then is, and of course it's teacher approved, because then when, I don't pick on Danielle here, when Danielle comes to me and says, I want to write this report on whatever it is, then I can, in my mind, again, as the teacher, I can say, can she actually, would she ever really be able to be successful with that? And then if in my mind, I can say, yeah, I think that's doable. She can do it and have some success with that and not fail and then just give up. That's kind of why when teachers do that kind of thing, that's why we do it, is that we want to make sure that we're setting kids up for success. All right. Okay. I'm just going to make a new page here. Oops. And they're basically, and we're not going to go into too much depth because you can read this in the readings. But there are 9, I think, I don't know, and I can't remember how many now, but these are the elements of a good makerspace project. So that's going to be our next big title, Elements of a Good Makerspace Project. All right, I ran out of room there. So there we go. All right, number 1, and in no particular order of importance, there all of these are important to any makerspace project. The first, I'll number them, but like I said, no ranking here. Purpose and relevance. Purpose and relevance. Right. And so again, there's that other category when a student says, oh, I don't want to do any of those 7 topics, I want to do this. Then that's also one of the things we consider, like, what's the purpose of it and how is this relevant to, and again, remember, everything we're doing has to be mapped back to an outcome. And how is that relevant to the outcome? Right? So that's something that we need to think about as the teachers. And again, set that up so that whatever projects kids choose, you could easily show that this maps back to mathematics and, I don't know, geometry or something like that. Okay. So let's just kind of like a couple little subpoints here. Right? For the student, then, is it personally meaningful? Right? And that, if we talk about that word right here, meaningful, what we're talking, think back then to our anticipatory sets and Marcia Tate. Remember, you don't have to write this down, but remember, what does that letter stand for? And the word is meaning, right? Is what we're looking at there, right? So is the project personally meaningful for the student, and what are they going to get out of it? Okay. And then let's just add this. Will it, let's say, well, we can say, will it prompt intrigue? Right? Not only within the student who wants to do that project, but again, remember, part of this is sharing with other people. It's like, wow, how did you do that? Right? That's very cool. I want to do that now. That kind of idea. Okay. Number 2 is time. Of course, and this is a huge one, right? This is the one of other than money, time usually are 2 biggest problems in the education world. Is, again, why don't we see more project-based learning? It's all about time and money, right? So, and time usually equals money in some way, right? So again, for kids to be successful, you have to give them sufficient time, right? And that goes again with the other category is, a student comes up to you and says, oh, I want to do this instead. And again, maybe that kid can handle it. It's like, yeah, that kid can be successful with that other project, but can they get it done in a week or 2? Whatever time frame that you've given for them to come from idea to product in the end. Is there sufficient time to do that? Because the other things you have to think about is that loop, right? So they're going to do this, and all of a sudden, boom, they hit a roadblock or a failure. Is there time to go back and start it all over again, kind of idea? So sufficient time, in school, and in some instances, depending on what they're doing, out of school as well, right? And so we could maybe add that in and out of school. Now, again, it also depends on the type of project that they're doing. Sometimes they can take it home with them, and sometimes they can't, right? Number 3 is complexity, right? So again, that kind of goes with time as well. Complexity, right? Is can they do it? Is it too hard for them to do? And how does that fit in with their own expertise and prior knowledge? And again, what outcomes are accomplished by doing that? So complexity, let's just put in here, I don't have room down there. So prior knowledge and expertise, prior knowledge and expertise. All right. Okay. Let's go down to the next one. Number 4 would be intensity. Oops. It is intensity. And so when we think about that, I want to give you an example. And of course, my doctoral work is in and around video games and game-based learning, in the educational K-12 setting. So, and of course, whenever I talk about it with people, one of the things, that people, because there's a lot of negative, press and a lot of negative talk around video games and how they're violent and they lead kids to grab a gun and go to the school and shoot people and that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, or that all video games are just leading to childhood obesity and they're not. So my rebuttal to all of that stuff is a couple of things. A is everything in moderation, right? I don't want my think about your own children. I don't want my own kids spending 12 hours a day on video games, or 12 hours a day really maybe on anything, right? It's all about balance and that kind of stuff. So in that respect, video games aren't a bad thing. But here's the other point that I make is, you think of a student, pick whoever, and they're not interested in whatever it is that you're presenting to them, right? They don't want to read the book or the textbook. They don't want to do the work. They're just not interested. But that same kid will spend hours and hours and hours trying to play this video game and win and master that game, right? Hours. And on average, the average person, by the way, if you don't know, the average person spends around 40 hours playing a video game from start to finish on average, right? You think about how many kids spend 40 hours trying to solve your chemistry equations or whatever that might be, right? Or reading books for your language arts class, right? Not very many. But that same kid who pushes back and doesn't want to do the schoolwork will spend all of that time trying to master that video game and try that level over, and then whatever, get killed or fail that level and try it again and again and again and again. And for all you video game players out there, let's say they try it 10 times and they can't pass that level, can't pass it. What do kids do when they can't pass a level of a video game? But they haven't given up hope yet, right? They're like, I got to win this level or I got to win this game. What do they do when they can't figure out a level? Okay, Tyler, you're on the right track. The internet. Yeah, there we go. They go on the internet, they look up a tutorial, they'll watch a YouTube video, they'll find what they call a walkthrough, they'll find cheats, right? And they invest all of this time in reading all of that information and viewing all of that information. But again, they won't do your social studies project, right? So again, when I argue about, video games are bad, that's kind of where I go to, because it is totally what happens in the real world, right? So intensity is around time and mastery, I think, is the two words that we should put in there. Okay. All right. Long-winded explanation. Number 5, connectedness. So anybody that tells you, oh, you shouldn't be playing video games, they need to be educated, right? All right. So again, this connectedness is all around, kids. I'm just going to say kids to kids. Okay. But it also can be kids, and again, our students, if you want to use that word, to adults. And I'm going to put in maybe in brackets here, experts, right? Because sometimes kids will be going, okay, I just things keeps failing. I need to talk to somebody like who's an engineer or a scientist or somebody who's got way more expertise in this field of making crazy little balls with holes in it than I do, and I have to talk to them to figure out why my experiment or my thing keeps failing, right? So there's that whole idea of being connected to the world, and again, that kind of goes back to our blooms and sharing and things like that. And of course, then this, of course, actually this whole thing here, I'm not going to have I'll try and squeeze it in here, is all about collaboration. Okay, it's all about collaboration. All right, number 6. Okay. Is access. Okay. And access is, and I'm just going to say it to a wide variety of materials. Okay. And again, that would be just based on the nature of their project, right? And so whether it be, you know, paints or wood or a computer program or a 3D printer or whatever it is, you need to have access to that. And then the other thing is that we, you know, and I'm not going to write them all down, you should know these already, is our 4 A's, right? I'll say them: anywhere, anytime, anyone, and at their own pace, right? So they need to have that as far as the access piece goes. Okay, last two. One is, what number were we on? 6, number 7. Okay, number 7 is shareable. So there we go again with our sharing, is that the project needs to be shareable. Hold on for a sec here. Just, we can just put in with others. And you stinker. There you go. So again, outside of the head, into the real world, and it has to be shareable. And again, why do we want them to share? Well, then they become the expert. They become the teacher. Then we've got that peer teaching going on, and it's motivating, right? It's like, yeah, wow, you made that. That is so cool. Like, right? So and then they have this great sense of success within themselves. Okay, so it's shareable with others in a variety of ways, obviously. And then the last one again falls into our Marsha Hunter Marsha Tate, sorry, thing, and it's under one of our N words, and that is novelty. Right? Is it cool? Right? I don't know. Is it, you know, does it lead to the? I'm going to write the words. I've got my fantastic sort of discovery. Right? Is there that, again, that sense of like, whoa, right? This is so cool, and so that kind of idea. And then I'm going to say easily reproducible. Okay. And again, easily reproducible doesn't mean, oh, I can, you know, it took me 15 hours to make this. Doesn't mean, oh, I can now make it in 5 minutes. But I mean, there's the ability to reproduce that super cool thing that that person made. So those are the elements of a makerspace, and so there's, you know, the reason I talk about this because it fits in very nicely into our all of those jigsaw pieces that we've really talked about. It also is really just about good teaching and how we should be teaching in the classroom, and of course how and how this might affect you in the long run in your own career. And I mean, if you could ever get, I mean, this may not be everybody's jam, but you know, if you can get involved in a makerspace thing at the school level, I would encourage you to do it. Even if you're not the lead person, just to be in there working with kids and seeing the excitement and seeing their faces and how their eyes light up when it's, you know, all these cool things going on. You get to see kids in a whole different light, right? You get them in your social studies class and they're like, yeah, ha about social studies, but you get them in a makerspace or something like that, and they're lit up and they're just like totally stoked about whatever you're doing. Anyways, with that all said, my friends, it's time for the weekend. So, well, here I'll do what I normally do is if you've got questions, comments, concerns, or want to talk to me, stick around. And if you're ready to get your weekend going, have a good one, have a safe one, and I'll see you next week. Okay? Thanks, everybody.